record the session. I will put it on a private link on YouTube, so you need the link to be able to see it. But that way, if people want to go back and go over things, we can. Welcome, everyone. We are expecting more people, so don't be surprised if we get some other folks joining in. This is, what, the fourth in my series of Dream Today, Travel Tomorrow, and we kind of had this whole Zoom presentation going on to have a way to learn about a destination and take advantage of the fact that we're all still home. Although we are opening up in different levels or stages across the world, right now we can't travel to Australia, but it is a good time to take advantage of being in one place to learn about the destination. Peter Askin is a good colleague of mine. I've been working with Peter for a long time. He heads up the North American division of Southern World. Peter, you're in Chicago today, right?
Correct. Yep.
And Peter's team works with, he and I work together on individual trips as well as group trips. They specialize in Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. So I've asked Peter to join us today, kind of give a little overview of what his company does and how we work together, and then share some information about Australia. Anybody here recognize my background, my virtual background? Anyone been to the Whitsundays?
No.
No?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay, so has anyone on the call been to Australia yet? Any parts of Australia? Kathleen, on a cruise or by land tour?
2 trips. One was more of a land that we organize ourselves, and then the second one was just in Melbourne.
Okay, terrific. Well, Peter, I'll turn it over to you just to have a very simple introduction. Do you have any slides or things you want to show?
Yeah, I've got a sort of a whistle-stop trip around Australia. So if you want to let me share my screen, I can start with that.
I will share. Wait, now it's asking me to share.
You have to share the screen with him, don't you?
Yeah.
No, he has to share the screen. I think he has
I can't do it because I'm not the host. So
no,
you just need to go
I
and
usually just, it usually asks me multiple or.
Yeah, correct.
Oh, they've changed the setup since 2 days ago. Okay. Let's see if that's weird.
I have shared the screen.
Video, so you don't have to see my ugly mug for the next 3 hours. I'm just kidding. It's not going to take that long. So, as Sheila said, my name's Peter Askin. I'm one of the owners of a company called Southern World, and we operate in. Sheila, you want to mute people?
Yeah. Okay.
That. Okay. Thanks, mate. So we operate in Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. We're known in Sheila's sort of background as an on-site, but in real speak, we're actually a.
Oh, hang on, Peter. I gotta get muted. You too. Got you unmuted again.
So I'm a.
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay, cool. Technical difficulties. So my company is a destination management company, and when Sheila has clients going down to Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji, she'll contact my company, and we take care of all the arrangements for her and for her clients. So it makes for a seamless way of looking after you as clients, because the very person that Sheila is dealing with in Australia and New Zealand or Fiji is the same person that's going to be contacting you when you arrive in our countries. And should anything go awry, like a missed flight or some weather issues, you've got somebody in the same time zone that you're at, rather than having to come back to Sheila to fix anything. So that's the way my company works. I thought I'd give you a little bit of an update as to what's happening COVID-wise in our countries. You may be aware that New Zealand has declared itself COVID-free now. We've gone, I think, 17 days without a case being tested positive. And the very last person that was suffering any COVID issues had tested okay about 4 days ago. So New Zealand is completely back to what is the new normal. So we can go to movie theatres, we can have sports stadiums filled. So the rugby competition is about to restart down there. But the big thing is that the borders are still closed. So that's going to be a while before New Zealand allows any non-essential person into New Zealand. If somebody does come in for any particular reason that they're allowed to, they have to quarantine for 14 days. If we hop across the Tasman, Australia is in a reasonably similar situation, considering the number of people that have been infected or tested positive, based on our population in New Zealand and their population over there. So
did we lose your audio, Peter?
you're not hearing me.
Oh, now you're back.
I'm sorry about that. I'm hoping maybe it says my internet connection is unstable, which is a bit of a concern. But we'll journey on. So Australia is a little bit behind New Zealand. Some of the states in Australia are almost COVID-free, but Australia as a country is not allowing people to travel between the states. Only people from Victoria and New South Wales can go between those two states. Queensland has closed its borders. South Australia, Tasmania, and the territories and Western Australia have all closed their borders as well. We believe maybe by September there could be an Australia-New Zealand travel bubble, which will allow for people to travel between Australia and New Zealand, and that certainly help my industry because we obviously need tourism to survive. The other country that we work very closely with is Fiji. It also hasn't had a case for a couple of months now, about a month and a half, I think. So you'd probably declare Fiji as COVID-free as well, but they as well have closed their borders. So I'm hoping that they're going to get into this little Australia-New Zealand travel bubble, and that will be the way the world opens up, I guess. So I can answer questions about that later, but I thought I'd give you just a little bit of a trip around Australia so you get a feel for the country for those of you that haven't been there. And maybe at some later stage I can come back and do a presentation on New Zealand as well. I am a Kiwi. I've lived in the States now for over half my life, 31 years. My relationship with Australia is my grandmother was born in Ballarat, so I'm not sure whether that gives me any hints at all with my presentation, but I've obviously travelled throughout Australia over many years with my company. So let's get moving here. So the latest sort of tourism word or phrase for Australia as they rebuild their promotion of their country is there's nothing like Australia. So what you'll see over the next little while is what Australia's got to offer as a tourism destination that very much caters to people who like wildlife. It's a country teeming with all sorts of different species of wildlife. and the wombat is one of the great species. So they talk about Australia with the wildlife, food and drink, natural beauty, and the culture. And that's their 4 sort of focus points to promote the country. And you can probably find all of that in just about every state. I mean, obviously, I don't think there's too many vineyards up in the Northern Territory, but they still have good food and wine. But apart from the Northern Territory, you could probably find a vineyard anywhere, and superb restaurants. So natural beauty, culture, and wildlife is all over Australia. Plenty of it. Amazing beauty. Some of the most stunning coastlines in the world, and the beaches. We talked about the food and drink. Vineyards almost everywhere throughout Australia. The coolest thing about going to Australia, I think, is the culture. And that's purely because it's the oldest living culture in the world. And it's a culture that's very, very much alive. The Australian government in the last few years has done a much, much better job of bringing culture into tourism and tourism into culture. So the Aborigines have been able to show their art and talk about their dream time to any particular visitor that has an interest in the culture. So if we look at Australia and we look at the United States, and I know I'm talking to Canadians, but it sort of puts it in perspective as to the size of Australia. It is a very large island, very large continent. And if we were talking in terms of travel, it's pretty similar from going from the east coast of Canada to the west coast of Canada, when you go from say Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane over to Perth. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't have the Canadian route that was there, and obviously all these routes are pre-COVID. But it shows you, if I add Vancouver in there, what an extensive direct air routes there are into Australia. And if you add going via New Zealand, that adds even more ways of getting pretty seamlessly to Australia. That's just another good map as to get a feel for the size. In a few minutes, I'll talk about the flight times of getting around, and I'll do that purely because it is not an easy country. We don't have the air travel or the population base that North America has. So from going to places like from Darwin to Sydney, you know, there's not 10 flights a day, and they're not large aircraft. So when you're planning an itinerary in Australia, and I know Canadians have a lot more time on their hands than your folks south of the border do, and you're not time poor, but if you want to see all of Australia, you do have to put a goodly amount of time. A few years ago, the Australian Tourism Commission, or Tourism Australia as it's now called, started selling Australia in bite-sized pieces. And they reckon that people from North America should view Australia like they view Europe. So, you know, when you go to Europe, you don't do, you know, Greece and Italy and Scandinavia and France all in one trip. You generally take a slice of Europe and do it well. And so that's what we try to do with Australia, unless you've got an inordinate amount of time. Best time to travel, best time to travel Australia, really, it's a year-round destination. The only time you wouldn't be looking at going up to Darwin in the far north is in the rainy season, and you know, that's going to be sort of November through to March. And it's kind of like the Okavango Delta up there at that stage. So, and it does get rainy a up north of Brisbane, up around the Great Barrier Reef, sort of January, February, March. Obviously, North Americans like to travel to Australia at that time of year because it's our winter. But just be aware that it is the rainy season. But seriously, you can travel to Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, Adelaide, Perth, even to Tasmania throughout the year. It will get very hot in Alice and Uluru, Ayers Rock, in the summer months, the Australian summer months, but it's not unlike going to Arizona or Florida in the American summertime. And that's just to give you an idea, as you're now well aware of sort of flight times. So if you're flying between sort of Perth and Sydney, it's a 4-hour flight. So similar for going transcontinental across Canada or the USA. So we talk about Australia, and again, I apologise. This is more of a US focused sort of presentation that I got helped out with from Tourism Australia, but they talk about it as a 2-week walkabout. You know, see 2 to 3 destinations, an easy 2-week itinerary your clients will return. It is closer than you think. Even coming from the Eastern time zone, it's not with direct flights out of Vancouver and the west coast of the USA. It's a lot easier than when I came up here back in the late 80s, and to get back home to New Zealand or going to Australia, I'd basically have to go from Denver or LA, then to Honolulu, and then down to Sydney, sometimes via Fiji. So with these direct flights and the newer aircraft, it's so much easier and close. So we'll get, hopefully we'll get back to those new routes when the world comes back to normal. But both Australia and New Zealand, great value for money. Certainly both can be seen as a value destination now. So we'll start off in New South Wales and look at mainly Sydney. We'll branch out a little bit into the other parts of New South Wales, but it's definitely the major gateway. Obviously Brisbane coming online and Melbourne as well, but the majority of people coming from North America will enter the gateway of Sydney. They might go home from another gateway, but they like to sort of start off in Sydney. So it is the welcome to Australia, and it's an amazing city, beautiful harbour city. So one of the things that you want to look at when you're looking at starting the vacation and going through these various cities and places you visit is what you're going to do when you're there. So the top 5 things in Sydney: cruise on the harbour, and there's a myriad of different ways to do it, with private boats, with small group boats, with quite large dining vessels, but you definitely want to go and do a cruise on Sydney Harbour. And I even say this to people who are physically cruising into Sydney from New Zealand or maybe from Southeast Asia. You don't get the feel of Sydney Harbour, looking out the porthole or from the deck of a cruise liner. So you definitely want to go out and experience it, on a morning tea or an afternoon tea, or what we like to call as a long lunch, and enjoy it with some good food and wine or beer. Climb the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I know it looks daunting, but the views from the bridge are just amazing. It's known as the coat hanger to locals. It's like being on an ocean racing yacht. You are harnessed in the whole way, and there's no way you can physically fall. So certainly put that on your list of things to do. being on the coast, it offers some magnificent beaches, and some of them you can drive to or take a tour to. A lot of them are accessible by the ferries that go in and around Sydney Harbour, so make use of those. The big thing to do in Sydney is obviously go and visit the Opera House. Now, you can do a tour there, you can dine there, but you definitely want to experience this amazing structure. We'll talk a little bit more about that, some of the performances that they have there. And obviously wildlife encounters. Now, I think every state I'm going to be talking about the wildlife, so you might get a little bit sick of hearing that, but Sydney has plenty of opportunities for you to encounter wildlife. You can't hold a koala in the state of New South Wales. You can only do that in Queensland and South Australia, but you can certainly get up close and personal to them. One of the newest things that have opened up in Sydney over the last few years is this Taronga Zoo wildlife retreat. They've actually built accommodation, very nice accommodation, within the zoo. And if you look heading out the view from the restaurant, you can see downtown Sydney. So it's directly across from the Opera House. It's like I think it's like a 10-minute ferry ride from Circular Quay across the harbour to Taronga Zoo. So what better way to seeing the zoo than physically staying there for 1 or 2 nights while you're in Sydney. This is one of my favourite events that they have. It occurs May, June. It didn't occur this year because of COVID, but I think it's maybe 10 years now that they've been doing it. Sheila, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But what they do, it's a festival of light and dance and performance, but it's all about the colours. And they light up the city in these vivid fluorescent lights. There'll be art on the Opera House, all the hotels, the office buildings. The boats will have their lights. So it's just an amazing time of year. If this is a time of year that you can travel, it's a great way to experience something completely different. So yeah, vivid Sydney. Another thing they do just a month earlier than that is they actually have opera on the harbour. They build this big stage, floating stage on the harbour, just around from the Opera House, and they have open air opera. So another pretty cool things to do. Sydney's been really good at putting on these sorts of stage shows and events. There's a couple of others that they have an amazing Mardi Gras. This is a little bit in the future, but they've got they're going to be host to the World Cup of Women's Basketball. So if you're a women's basketball fan, maybe that's something you should put on the agenda to visit to Australia to see. And for those of you that haven't seen Hamilton, it would be a good opportunity to go and see Hamilton at the Opera House. The Sydney Opera House is, I think, the largest, if not one of the largest opera houses in the world, and has many different stages and places where you can see dance and opera and musicals. So it's not just one opera hall. And there it is, spectacular as it has been for all those years. And that's a really good view of the Sydney Harbour Bridge from just under the Opera House. That's a bunch of restaurants and bars all around there. Sydney being a coastal town, they are nutty about their beaches and their surfing. So this is Bondi Beach. If you have the will, you can go and learn to surf there. There's a great little operation there on Bondi called Let's Go Surfing. One of the must-dos when you are in Sydney is to go and visit the Blue Mountains. Oh, I went a little bit too fast there. So this is about an hour west of Sydney. And the Blue Mountains are about 2.5 times the size of the Grand Canyon. So if you can imagine the Grand Canyon covered in eucalypt, that's what you're looking at. And so it's called the Blue Mountains because the eucalypt gives off this blue haze. Really, really spectacular. If you go about a couple of hours west of there, you're going to end up at Walgan Valley. And this is a luxury property, sort of still in the Blue Mountains, but just a little bit obviously west. And it's a great property. It's a one and only. And for some people, it's a great way to start your vacation because you get off your flight. The flights that arrive in from Canada are going to arrive in early in the morning. You can either be driven out to the Blue Mountains, through the Blue Mountains on a really nice scenic route, or heli out here. And you land in, it's almost like you're in the, what's the Ngorongoro crater. And instead of the, within the Ngorongoro crater has got, elephants and African animals. This is just teeming with wombats and wallabies and wallaroos and kangaroos. So when you wake up in the morning and you see those little villas there in front of you, there could be 20 or 30 wallabies just grazing in the lawn in front of you. So if you start your vacation out there, it gives you a really good wildlife and outback experience all in one, and then head off, and great way to sort of rest after the long flight as well. All the way up north from Sydney is a place called Byron Bay, and that's just south of the Queensland border. It's a nice little sort of health nut surfy town. Beautiful area set on sort of almost like a tropical rainforest right beside the Pacific Ocean. Great for whale watching. So that's just a different part of New South Wales. And another part of New South Wales that people don't talk about that often is Lord Howe Island. Obviously part of the state, but it's an island about a 2-hour flight from Brisbane and Sydney. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I did a Zoom presentation with some people this morning with the head of Tourism New South Wales, and because I've never been to Lord Howe, and she said it's a cross between sort of Tahiti with the stunning waters and green like New Zealand. So, and interestingly enough, it's population controlled. So there's about, I don't know, 400 people who live on the island, who reside there, and they only allow 400 to 500 people as visitors on at any one time. So yeah, beautiful, beautiful place. So again, something a little bit different for New South Wales. So from there we head south to Victoria. I believe was a lady that's on the call, so this might bring back some nice memories to her. So this is a little bit like the competition between maybe Chicago and New York, and I'm not sure what competitive cities, Toronto and Vancouver maybe, but there's a real rivalry between Melbourne and Victoria. So I really like this next slide. Sydney is a place to see, Melbourne is a place to do. And Melbourne really is a place to do. It's just got so many different activities around the city and within the city. And as much as Sydney says it's an art city because it's got the Opera House, Melbourne has an equal to their Opera House. And and you know, you've got the Grampians, not the Blue Mountains, food and wine down there. It really is an amazing city. It's a city of lanes and arcades. And within these arcades is all sorts of artware and shopping. So one of the must-dos on the first couple of days in Melbourne is to do a lanes and arcades tour. Have somebody take you around and introduce you to the city, to all the little chocolate shops and coffee shops and bars and restaurants. So it's a really, really cool way to get to know Melbourne. Melbourne's a tram city. It has an amazing coffee culture and some of the finest dining anywhere in the world. It's a cool city because you can balloon over it. Not many cities in the world allow that. And if you see just over her head, you can see the sports precinct. And that's where the Sydney cricket ground is, where the 56 Olympics were. It's where the Australian Open tennis is played. There are all sorts of sports stadiums in that precinct. And there you go. There is the MCG. So they use it for Aussie rules football and obviously for cricket as well. So Melbourne has a bunch of diverse sites that you can tour around, from the Yarra Valley with the wine district. There's another wine district there in the Mornington Peninsula. There's Phillip Island where the penguins are. There's the very famous Great Ocean Road. Of course, Ballarat, where my grandmother was born, where the gold rush was in the 18th century. So a must-do. Obviously, I talk about too many must-dos on this presentation, but this is one of them, the Great Ocean Road with the 12 apostles, although I think there's only 10 left now. And those are those huge rock formations that jut out of the sea. So that's a full day tour, unless you're going to heli one way, as a day tour out of Melbourne. Again, wildlife to be seen anywhere and everywhere. At Anglesea, it's a very famous shot on the golf course. The Yarra Valley that I talked about, there's some great ballooning out there as well. And there's also, out in the Yarra Valley, there's an amazing animal sanctuary called Healesville that my company actually helps fund. It's a rescue sanctuary. It's a great way to get up and close. It's one of the few places in the world that you can actually swim with a platypus. It's got an amazing animal hospital that was put to full use during the fires. And then, of course, you've got Phillip Island with the fairy penguins and the various ways you can see them as they come out of the ocean. So there's a quick little recap of 72 hours in Melbourne and some of the things that you'd want to put on that itinerary. I mentioned the sports. You know, obviously, people flock to Melbourne for the tennis open. But if you wanted to go and see an Aussie rules football game, generally on a Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday and Sunday. And so, you know, we can arrange to get you tickets so you can actually physically go with, 100,000 screaming fans and watch a game that you really have no idea. I've been to probably 10 Aussie rule games and watched a few more on TV with partners and friends. And I still don't understand the nuances of the game. I'm a rugby nut, and we call this aerial ping pong. But it's a little bit like Gaelic football, if you've ever seen that.
Peter, there's a question. What's the name of the rescue center?
Out at Healesville, that's the Healesville Animal Sanctuary.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So leaving Queensland, we're going to head up to, leaving Victoria, head up to Queensland.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't skip the best part.
Beautiful one day, perfect the next. Obviously, Queensland is known for the Great Barrier Reef, and there you can see it in all its glory and how much of the coastline of Queensland it actually takes. But there's a lot more to Queensland than the Great Barrier Reef. So I'll give you a little rundown of the highlights of Queensland. Obviously, it has an amazing rainforest, the Daintree, more than 1,000 national parks, and it has 3 of the world's largest sand islands, including Fraser Island. So lots to experience and do, and as you know, like every state in Australia, you could spend your whole vacation singularly in one state if you wanted to, and still not see it all. I put the temperatures on the Queensland slide purely because it sort of tells you, you know, what a temperate climate it really is. So even though they do have a rainy season up in far north Queensland during the summer months, it's still very mild temperatures year round. Again, a ton of wildlife experiences. You can cuddle a koala there. You can read and just see exactly all those amazing wildlife experiences you can do. The one at the bottom was the one that I was fascinated with, because I had no idea. In a previous life, I also sold Africa. So, and I believe you guys had a Big 5 presentation a few weeks ago. So I know what the Big 5 is, but I have no idea what the Grade 8. So I'm going to show you what the Grade 8 is. So you can dive with sea turtles, whales, sharks, clownfish, Nemo, giant clams, rays, cod and grouper, and a Mari Rossi. Now that thing is huge. That's real, true to life. It's quite an amazing looking species. So the major gateway to Queensland is Brisbane, and I hadn't been to Brisbane in about 20 years when I went, not last year but the year before. And I was blown away with how they have rebuilt this city. It's one of the most modern cities in the world now. The Queensland government is spending billions on infrastructure. It will be the major gateway for Qantas. So they've rebuilt a huge big airport there, or rebuilt. Unfortunately, we were expecting to be able to be flying direct on Qantas from Chicago back in March, but that's been put off now, possibly until September. But honestly, I don't think it'll happen until 2021 now. But Brisbane, like Perth, is a river city. And it's got restaurants, it's got bars, it's got cycleways, walkways all around the riverways into downtown Sydney. So for instance, you can stay in South Bank, where all the great restaurants are, in the cultural district, and you can catch a ferry up to one of the koala sanctuaries. So it's just an absolutely stunningly beautiful city. I know a lot of Canadians go to that area for the winter months and have long stays. So, yeah, I was just so impressed with how well they have really rebuilt. It was such a clean and really attractive city now. So just an hour south of Brisbane is the Gold Coast. And I know this is a huge long stay destination for Canadians. There's also the Sunshine Coast, which is the home of the Everglades and the Australia Zoo. Noosa's around there. There's some absolutely beautiful beaches, as you can see. And then heading north is the Fraser Coast, and that's where Fraser Island is, and the sand, big sand dune islands. And that's where you can do some incredible whale watching. And then, of course, heading further north to far north Queensland, you're going to come across, towns like Airlie Beach and Townsville and Cairns and Port Douglas. So, you're going to have the Whitsundays as well as the far north Queensland of Cairns and Port Douglas. So just to give you an idea of different accommodation experiences, there is a ton of way to experience the reef by actually staying out there. There is even accommodation underwater on the reef in the Whitsundays. But the traditional ones on the southern reef are Lady Elliot, Heron and Wilson. Then you've got those 4 on the Whitsundays. Hamilton Island has a ton of accommodation on it, from apartments to Qualia, which was a luxury property, to a good four-star hotel. So plenty of accommodation opportunities for you there. And then heading further north, you've got the likes of Orpheus and Magnetic, and of course the renowned Lizard Island, which is really one of the only properties on the far outer reaches of the Great Barrier Reef. And if you're a diver, that's a stunning place to stay, because you walk, well, most of these islands like Badara and Green, Haggerstone, Lizard, you basically walk off the beach onto the outer barrier reef. So from there we head to South Australia, and that's sort of known as Artisan Australia. And sure enough, and there it is, directly in the middle. Down the
Peter,
bottom.
we have a question about the reef. Do you want to take questions now or at the end?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, why not?
Nora is asking about the protection status of the reef.
Okay, look, and maybe that's a good time too to also bring up the fires. There's going to be some good that comes out of you know, this sit back and relax and the lack of tourism. Not that tourism has affected the bleaching. You know, the bleaching has come about by the warming of the waters. But the amount of bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef is pretty insignificant. But I'm not going to deny that it is there. But they are at this stage developing ways of regrowing the reef, and that's turning out to be quite successful. So listen, there are hundreds and hundreds of square miles of Great Barrier Reef. So it is being protected as much as it can be, but obviously Mother Nature can't do it all. But and I'll go back to the fires as well. The slowdown in tourism has allowed for the grow back of so many plants, of the animals, you know, and talking to some of the operators, especially on Kangaroo Island that we're going to be talking about shortly. The Kangaroo Island is almost back to exactly the way it was before Christmas. The regeneration of the plants and the wildlife species has been amazing.
That's one of the things you and I talked about, Peter, is combating the news that was on every night during January. Right. And you know, Canadians thought the entire continent was under fire, instead of it being like 3 to 4% of the continent.
And you also have to understand that this is a yearly event. You know, there are fires in the Blue Mountains every year. You can't stop fires from the eucalypt trees. A lot of them are just naturally started, and regeneration is a big part of that whole process. So yeah. So anyway, does that answer the question?
I think so. Someone's asking if the government, Nora's asking if the government was going to allow shipping through the reef. I don't know about that.
No, I mean, the only vessels that are allowed through that area, and it's a very narrow passage, are the cruise line. I mean, there is a shipping line through, what do they call it? The sea up there. Oh, I remember it so well because my father-in-law fought in the Pacific. The Coral Sea. Yeah, so there is a natural shipping line through the, oh, there it is right in front of me, the Coral Sea. and obviously we do have small ships that go out to the Barrier Reef, but none come anywhere near affecting the Great Barrier Reef bed, as it were.
Okay, thank you.
So South Australia's tagline is wow. So there we go. It's wildlife again, outback and wine. So if you go back to that slide, about 80% of South Australia is outback. The well is 100%, and the wine is probably about 4% of the wine mass, land mass. But that's their tagline. Has wonderful, completely different wildlife experiences. You're swimming with the sea lions, great bird watching, koalas in the trees, kangaroos everywhere, especially especially on Kangaroo Island. But you're up close and personal wherever you go in South Australia, because there are so many wide open places. Great opportunities out on the Eyre Peninsula. So there's all sorts of different experiences that you can find no matter where you go. The night sky experiences in the Gawler Ranges, the craziness of Coober Pedy. This is where the opal mines are, where people live under the ground. So it's just an incredibly different type of destination. Again, you could spend 2 or 3 weeks just doing South Australia. The Gawler Ranges, all the way out in the outback, great bird life, great wildlife. And then, of course, you've got the many, many vineyards. I think the best vineyards in Australia are in the South Australian state, McLaren Vale. Oh boy, I'm losing it. It's getting late in the day with these ones. But yes, there are a ton of great vineyard regions within South Australia. So you can stay in the vineyards, you can cycle through the vineyards, but that's something you want to do when you're in South Australia. It's also a nice little place to hop off to go to other destinations. And again, I will bring up New Zealand. There is a great way of getting from North America to New Zealand direct, and then you just transit in Auckland and fly straight into Adelaide, which is the capital of South Australia. The other thing about South Australia, which I like, is it's the middle point for some of the great train journeys. Australia is the only continent in the world where you can go north to south and east to west on a train. So you can take the Garn from Adelaide all the way up to Darwin, or you can take the Indian Pacific from Perth via Adelaide again to either Sydney or Melbourne. There are train journeys up the east coast too, into Queensland from Sydney and from Melbourne. But these two journeys, the Garn and the Indian Pacific, are two of the most magnificent journeys in the world. The cool thing about doing these train journeys in Australia is you're doing it with Aussies. Aussies like to use this rail service as well, and they are luxury trains. They have a gold standard and a platinum standard. The platinum have are non-bunks, whereas the gold are bunk-based, but still luxury. They have only the single cabins in the gold class don't have an ensuite. So yeah, if train journey is your thing, and I know Canada's got some wonderful rail journeys as well, try and utilize getting around Australia at least in one direction on one of these magnificent train journeys. So from Adelaide, we head west to Western Australia, and the home of the quokka, which you just saw with one of the Hemsworths. I don't know which one that guy was. And I mentioned before Perth being a river city, so I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But this is the largest state by far.
You mean you're not sure which brother it was or which animal?
No, which brother? There's too many of them now. So, no, I know it was a quokka. So this is the most diverse state in all of Australia. It is huge. It is the largest state by far, and it has the most diverse amount of, geography, geology, wildlife, and experiences. You've got the Kimberley in the north, which is, almost undiscovered. You've got the Ningaloo Reef, which is a fringing reef, unlike the Great Barrier Reef. So you can physically walk off the beach. You can swim with whale sharks. There are these weird little things that are quokkas. So look, it's an amazing state. And it's sort of coming into its own. There is a direct flight from London into Perth, one of the longest flights in the world. And that's really opened up the state. WA used to get most of its income from its mining. But when mining fell away, they really put their investment into tourism. So it's very much, Perth is a new reborn city as well, a river city, as I said. So you can take a ferry out to the coast and then over to Rottnest Island, which is where these little quokkas. You can overnight there in those the tented properties you can see there, or just do it as a day trip. There are no vehicles on Rottnest, so you just cycle around or take the little commuter bus that'll get you around. Also good for its wine growing. There's two areas, just north of Perth, the something Valley, and then there's the Margaret River, which is just south. It's about a 3-hour drive south of Perth. Perth is also, WA is also a really good self-drive destination. So you can do some good, 7-10 day self-drives around the coast, or even drive all the way up to the Ningaloo Reef. But if you do the south coast, you can go through the Margaret River, Brusselton, the wineries. There's a great walking track down there. Also home to this beautiful beach where you are guaranteed to see a kangaroo daily. Amazing wildlife season there, which starts, it's around about September through November, maybe the end of August through to September. So the wildflowers are beautiful. Yeah, that was Lucky Bay where you see the kangaroo, the wave rocks, and then of course that unbelievably beautiful pink Lake Hillier. I mentioned swimming with the whale sharks, and obviously manta rays. There's humpback whales there. The dolphins at Monkey Mire will just come into the shore, as you can see there, to be fed. They got a bit lonely during COVID because there were no humans there to feed them on a daily basis, but they would still come in. But yes, there's the Ningaloo Reef, which, as I said, is a fringing reef. So it's really cool just to be able to walk off the shore to a reef. There's some really nice accommodation up there. This is a tented property called Salsalis, which is right on the reef. And just in that same area of the Bungles. And then, of course, you've got the beautiful coastal areas where, if you can believe it, there are horizontal waterfalls because of the amount of water there and the speed of the tides. The only way you can really get to this area is by small ship cruising, and you do that from at the very top end from Darwin, all the way across to Broome. And that, of course, is the Kimberleys. So a lot of people will helicopter just to see the Kimberleys, or small fixed-wing aircraft. But the only way to really get up close and personal, is to take these small ships and use their tenders to go ashore. So from there, we head to the Northern Territory, and probably the major attraction, other than the culture, is to go there and experience Uluru, known as Ayers Rock. So you'd incorporate, the indigenous part, because Uluru is a sacred place, along with several other rock formations in what we call the Red Centre. So it's a great way to experience the culture, learn some of their arts and crafts. They have an amazing way of depicting art, and it's all dot painting. So maybe learn to do that. You can no longer climb Uluru, so but you can certainly walk around the base. And it's a great way to see the Southern Cross and the southern sky. So there's a thing there called Sounds of Silence, where you dine out under the stars, and they have an astronomer there that points it out as well. There's also a light installation there. It's about the size of 3 football fields, designed by a British bloke. It was supposed to be there for 2 years. I think it's now in its 8th year. And it is just, they come out on at night, obviously, they're fluorescent, and they're just incredible. So that's another wonderful, innovative art experience that you can find in Australia. Probably one of the nicest accommodations anywhere in Australia is this property called Longitude 131, a tented luxury property with uninterrupted views of Uluru. If we head to the very top, that's where you get to Kakadu, just a mass of water, so unbelievable for bird life, for fishing, barramundi, a lot of crocodiles, lots of Everglades, and some pretty cool accommodations up there. But another place to indulge in Aboriginal culture. Last but not least, we have Tasmania. And you know I'm a Kiwi, so many Australians have said, oh, you'll love Tasmania. It's just like New Zealand. And I found it to be only slightly like New Zealand. I thought it was more like Ireland or Scotland. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that a lot of the early penal colonies were in Tasmania. So a lot of the construction of the roads and the bridges looked a lot like, the Lake District of England, or the bridges that you'd see in Scotland or Ireland. Definitely, the food, the cuisine, some of the topography is like New Zealand, but Tasmania, it's its own place, and it's a really beautiful country. Great self-drive destination. So again, it's a place that you can go out and explore. Sheila can design an itinerary, and then you can just go and drive your way around Tassie. Easy to get to. I'm led to believe that another benefit of this pandemic is that it looks as though Air New Zealand and possibly Qantas are going to be opening up Hobart from New Zealand again. So that will be a nice route, an easy way to get from New Zealand to Tasmania, because we actually do a lot of itineraries that just do New Zealand and Tasmania. And of course, you've got to fly either via Sydney or Melbourne to get there from New Zealand. So there's a nice sort of 6-day itinerary. Do a little bit of tripping around Hobart, then go up to Freycinet Peninsula, and then over to Cradle Mountain, to Launceston and out. So that's a nice little itinerary. You could add days on. You could certainly spend 3 or 4 days in Hobart, and probably a little bit more in Freycinet and Cradle Mountain as well. Again, more animals, but in their natural environment, this is the only place you're going to find a Tasmanian devil. So it's not like that cartoon character, it is real. And it got named the Tasmanian devil because when these guys were in the penal colonies, and they'd been, they're locked up in solitary confinement, a lot of them, and they'd hear these animals and it shrieks at night. And they honestly believed that the devil was coming to get them. So yeah, it makes a horrific call at night. Unlike this gorgeous little fella, the wombat, they abound in various parts of Tasmania. If you're lucky enough to see a platypus, that's why it's always good to go to a zoo or a sanctuary to see them, because they are pretty hard to find in the wild. Farm to table, it's a huge big thing in Tassie, and with a lot of Australia and New Zealand cuisine, with the restaurants, and especially restaurants in vineyards. One of the weirdest, oddest things to see and do, which is really challenging, is MONA, the Museum of Old and New Art. This was built by a very eccentric Tasmania who made his fortune internet gambling. And he built this, and a lot of the art pieces are very challenging. So you have to be wide-eyed and take it all in stride. There is some unbelievable art in there. There's also a great brewery and a vineyard incorporated in it. It is free for Tasmanians to go to it, but it is funded by international visitors, but well worth it. It's just a little trip down the river, down the estuary from Hobart. There's some great walking trails in Tasmania. This is the Walkalina Walk. Tasmania has a rather tragic Aboriginal history, and so this the Walkalina Walk is actually owned and run by Aborigines, so yeah, a stunning walk along the Bay of Fires. But there are many other walks that you can experience in Australia as well. So this is one of the penal colonies. This is Port Arthur, a very historic site just out of Hobart, and a must-see if you've got that time. I already dwelled on the walking trails. There's plenty of them throughout Tasmania. The newest one is the Three Capes track. They do have reasonably high-end accommodations on the tracks, so you're not camping out in the wild. And then there's lots of wild activity with mountain biking, and it's also a haven for fly fishing. Both Australia and New Zealand are huge fly fishing destinations for North Americans. And also golf. It has some of Australia's finest golf courses. Most of them are links courses. This is Barnbougle Dunes and Lost Farm. It's a privately owned public course, if that makes sense. And it's just in between Launceston and Hobart on the coast. Just actually north of Freycinet, actually, which is an absolutely beautiful national park. You can see Wineglass Bay down there. Oh, there's a much better shot of it. Whilst you're staying in this area, go out and experience oysters right out of the ocean. Also known for its vineyards throughout the whole state. There's some great renowned vineyards. I talked about Cradle Mountain. It's a fairly high elevation by Australian standards. Some excellent hiking here. It does snow here in the winter. So that's a little bit of adventure activity for you, some beautiful walks. And there's the accommodation. There is other accommodation, but that's the nicest accommodation in the area. So that is it, folks.
Well, that's terrific, Peter. I said an hour, but my goodness, you crammed an awful lot of information and a fantastic overview of Australia in there. We ran a few minutes over. We had some technical glitches at the beginning and thankfully got those sorted. Peter, do you have a few more minutes if people have questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. We'll get you want to turn off the sharing?
Yeah.
Does anybody have a question? Maybe raise your hand, and if you want to ask Peter, we got the expert here. Will there be a New Zealand part? Not today, but maybe we can do a follow-up to focus on New Zealand if Peter's game.
Absolutely. I'm not sure how I turn off the sharing and give it back to you. Maybe you just stop. Oh, stop share. There we go.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Perfect.
Cool.
Thank you. We had a couple of new people come in and out. People are saying thank you very much. That was very enjoyable, very educational. For those that joined
appreciate
late,
you all coming in.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I appreciate everybody coming in. This is a new world. I Zoom all day, every day to people basically all over the world, but you are my first Canadian audience, so thank you. I should have had a Canadian flag up the back there. I'm sorry.
Let me make sure I got everybody unmuted here. I was saying to Peter, I like to have the faces on the screen because it doesn't make it seem like you're doing a webinar where you're just talking to an empty screen. So it does give you a sense of seeing people. Marianne or Hazel just asked me about missing the beginning. Yes, I did record it, so I can send the link to people. There was an awful lot of information there. It was just fantastic overview. So thank you very much. Anyone have any questions while we still have them on the screen here?
No question.
Peter, how's tourism? Obviously, nobody is moving right now, right? And you mentioned at one point, maybe there'll be a bubble between Australia and New Zealand.
Yes. So that's basically all my staff are doing at the moment is gearing up for something we've never done before and doing domestic tourism. So, my business has always been built around the contracts that we have based on international visitors. But everybody's so desperate for business, they want us to go out and get business whichever way we can. So we've now got 800 lines for travel agents to call us in Sydney, and we'll be selling Australia to New Zealanders and New Zealand to Australians and Australia to Australians. So it's a whole new world. The interesting thing is that I honestly believed that when we got back to tourism in New Zealand, purely for Kiwis at the moment, that we would have, if you did, say, the jet boat ride in Queenstown, that you'd have to have, social distancing. But because the whole thing's COVID-free now, it's back to normal. So it's going to be interesting when Australia opens up for Australians to travel between states, how they're going to go about that, because they are not at back to normal stage yet. So yeah, it's a whole new thing. I'm intrigued to see what's going to happen in Canada and the USA. So
yeah, we're kind of doing that here too. Where domestic, once we can travel again, domestic travel is going to be what recovers first. Most Canadians don't really visit their backyard, so we can't go east yet. Newfoundland, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI are all closed down. But we're starting to see some offers now with Alberta and British Columbia. So hopefully we'll mirror what you're doing in Australia, and hopefully it won't be too much in the future before we can actually do international travel again and come visit you down under.
Oh, look, we can't wait. You know, Canadians are so welcome in Australia and New Zealand for all sorts of reasons. You know, you're a friendly bunch of folk, but we love it because you don't flit in and flit out. You come in and you really experience the countries. And you know, over my many years of selling in the Canadian market, you know, people that come down for 2 or 3 months at a time, it's just amazing. So yeah, we're looking forward to that day too.
Yeah, I think Canadians, given the size of Canada, we have an appreciation for how big Canada is. You know, you're not going to visit someone coming to Canada, you're not going to visit Newfoundland and British Columbia on the same trip unless you're hiring a private jet or you have a couple of months. So the same would be true for visiting Australia. I'm getting other people asking, please do one about New Zealand. So we'll have to book you, sir, for a follow-up.
Yep, certainly will. And I'll try not to keep it over an hour for that one. So
I really appreciate your time. Thank you. Any other questions, folks, while we have them on the line? Yeah, Kathleen, go ahead.
It's not so much a question as a comment, because you've made my life so much more difficult, because you showed so many beautiful places. And although I've been to Australia twice, we're going to New Zealand next February, and we're not sure that we'll be able to go on the cruise that we'd planned. So we may end up going to Australia again, maybe Tasmania this time. It is a beautiful country.
it is. And how long did you spend in Melbourne when you were there?
A month in Melbourne, and then a month in Uluru, Alice Springs, Cairns, Hamilton Island, Sydney, and Melbourne, and the Great Barrier Reef too, and the coast, the Golden Coast. You did not mention the flies in
Yeah. Look, I try to stay away from the negatives.
Well, I must say, those flies everywhere when we were in the what was it, near Alice Springs. I forget what it was.
Yeah, look, the best time to see the red center is going to be in the winter months. So, you know, anywhere from sort of, you know, April through till maybe September. If you're there during the summer months, you're right. The flies can be horrendous.
Well, we were there in March.
Okay, yeah. It would have been warm, wouldn't it?
It was more the flies that were bothering us than the heat. But the
That's
food.
why you wear the net over your head.
Yeah.
And Laura, you've been to Australia too. You came in a bit late. So you've been once or twice? Whoops, you got yourself on mute. Let me unmute you. You okay? There you go.
Yeah, a couple of times. The picture in the background is that big guy that's at the reef. He was swimming around with me.
The Maori Rossa. Yeah, wow,
Yeah,
cool.
he's just huge. It's like, you think when you first see him, like, oh, you're going to get attacked, but he's just like looking at you with his big eyeball. And it's like, he just very quiet, very slow moving. I went up and saw the koala bears up in Cairns, Darwin to see the termite mounds, down south to see the little fairy penguins. So I try to see all the little weird animals. Over to Tasmania to see a Tasmanian devil.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Hazel's just mentioning it would have been nice to know to bring nets for the flies, I guess.
Oh yeah, we were
Yes.
told.
Nobody told us.
Oh,
I had two friends that went, and they showed pictures of them covered in these nets, right? Hats and the jackets and everything. It's horrendous, they said.
Yeah, we used to use corks in the old days, but now it's a little bit more modern with the nets.
Well, this was fantastic.
All right, I'm going to go and cook my wife dinner.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Kat has a question. Do you have time for one more?
Sure.
I think, do you have a question, Kat? Oh, applause, sorry. That was applause. I misinterpreted a raised hand for a wave. So thank you very much, Peter. Thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate your time and the fantastic overview. I will send everyone a recorded link so you can watch it at your leisure. And I'll be back to you, sir, to plan something for New Zealand.
Super.
Perfect.
Yes.
Right.
Great. Okay.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.